Congressman Steve Scalise, thank you so much for being here.
Megyn, it's great to be back with you.
So I thought of you over the past 10 days because, you and a very small collection of your fellow representatives are in a small group of people who have experienced this twice now, coming under attack in your role as a representative, once as a congressman at that baseball game where you were shot, and then again at the Capitol Hill riot. And I was wondering whether it brought up, first of all, any PTSD for you, post-traumatic stress.
Well, immediately as things were happening, Megyn, it absolutely came back to the baseball field. You know, those visions come back. Unfortunately, my Capitol Police security detail that's with me, who saved me the day of the baseball shooting. One of my team members comes onto the floor when I was on the floor during the debate, and he says, "Sir, we've got to go." And he had a very stern face, and I know them. They're when they say something, you follow what they say, and so I just went right behind him, and we started going out of the chamber. Next thing you know, we're going through some tunnels, and we left the building and went to an undisclosed location with some of the other House and Senate leadership, Republican and Democrat, and a lot of things, emotions were going through me, but clearly, was thinking about some of those same emotions from the ball field that day.
Oh, I'm sure, because at that point, you don't know what's happening exactly, right? You know there's a danger, but did you have an appreciation for how bad it was?
Well, you don't think that the Capitol is going to be breached. Last thing you're thinking is somebody's going to come out and start shooting all the Republicans on the field. Same regard if you're on the House floor debating a vote you're going to be taking. The last thing you're thinking is that people are going to storm the Capitol. It's just not. It's not. It's almost surreal. But then then it's happening, and your emotions kind of capture that. But then you start focusing on what you have to do next, and it's just such a sad thing that happened. But it brings anger, brings a lot of other emotions too.
Well, can I ask you about that? Because I think if I were a lawyer defending those being charged with inciting a riot, right? We've heard that term used against Trump, against President Trump, even in the impeachment articles. Um, I would argue about foreseeability, and I realize the argument on the other side is he whipped them up. He had them believing massive voter fraud. His surrogates were out there saying, fight, fight, threatening congressmen if they didn't, act strong, if they didn't stand up, take our country back, all that. I get that. But the I don't know that all the people doing that, and I know you were one of the ones who was raising questions about voter fraud, could could foresee that the mob would breach the Capitol and go in there in a lawless manner, threatening and hurting people.
Yeah, and I said this back when I was shot. I mean, there were political motivations behind it, but there's absolutely no excuse for anybody to resort to violence. We all have political disagreements. It's one of the foundations of our nation in the First Amendment, but it doesn't give you the license to go and attack someone else. And look, the people that got into the Capitol, they had to first attack police. There was a police officer murdered, killed out there that day, Officer Seeknick. They crawled through broken windows to get there. You're trespassing, and it's anarchy at that point. You're violating the law. What was your motivation? Look, I mean, I've talked about President Trump should have been unequivocal in denouncing what had happened the day of the violent attack, and he wasn't that day. He did later, but ultimately, anyone who crosses the line and says that they're going to resort to violence of any kind, at that point, you ought to be charged, and they are being charged, by the way. You ought to go to jail. You ought to be held accountable for
Oh,
violating the
yeah.
law at that point.
I mean, those are criminals.
Yeah.
I do believe a fair share of the protesters there thought they were just going to go outside and wave their flags and, sort of make their voices heard without lawlessness. But there was an unhealthy portion of the group that was planning on attacking and had come equipped with zip ties and other potential weaponry, on the lookout to hurt somebody. I mean, that was pretty clear. And the hang Mike Pence chants, I mean, it was just deeply disturbing. And now we're
Very.
seeing, in the wake of it, And there's a lot I want to get to with you, what your experience with this and, where you feel about violent rhetoric and all that. But I do want to ask you because what we're seeing is not just a condemnation of those who committed violence, but of everyone who pushed what the Democrats and the media are now calling, quote, the big lie. Now they've deemed, the notion of voter fraud on a widespread level, which has not been proven, to be, quote, the big lie that the president and all of his supporters pushed. They accuse you of this as well and say all of those people have blood on their hands. Is that fair?
Megan, it's amazing to see the righteous indignation from the left, and just keep the perspective that first of all, uh, presidents have legal options. Candidates for presidents have legal options to go to the courts. Al Gore did it. It didn't. It took over a month for the Al Gore Bush, Bush v. Gore case to get resolved. Nobody accused him of sedition. You just look over the summer where you had violence in the streets, where cities were burned down. Cops were being shot and murdered. People were being beaten and murdered in the streets the entire summer. I was calling that out. You never saw the left calling it out. In fact, you had some members of Congress encouraging the violence during the summer. Nobody said there's blood on their hands. Nobody called for people to be removed back then. Again, I've called this out on both sides, Megan, and I think a lot of us have, and we have to. If you see violence, if you see people taking the law into their own hands to go and attack and hurt other people, that has to be called out. Not just when it's happening on the other side of the political aisle, on both sides.
Hmm.
And those on the left were not calling it out during the summer, but today they want to act like they've got some moral high ground. We ought to all be disgusted when we see it, no matter where violence comes from.
Yeah, no, they weren't. And I know you wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently calling out specifically some members of the media like Chris Cuomo who said, where is it written that protests have to be polite, right? Like and
Yeah,
now
I
won't
didn't. And
acknowledge
then, by
that
the
they
way,
were part
Megan,
of the problem.
right. By the way, I didn't agree with him then, and I don't agree that violence was right at the Capitol. So if it's okay in some places, and you encourage that narrative, which they did, then you own it. If you were calling it out both times, then you've been consistent that violence is not the way we solve our differences.
Hmm. They're not surprisingly though, they're not focused on that. They're focused on the rhetoric that spun these people up. And I've been somebody who's defended the President Trump's right to challenge these results electorally and said, let's wait and see it play out in the courts. And of course, he lost 60 out of 61 cases, and the one he won was on procedural grounds. It wasn't a big win. So, okay, after that, you have to accept reality and move on. And that's where people start to really blame people like you, the Republicans who continued to fight, right? I know you signed the amicus brief in support of Texas versus Pennsylvania, Texas tried to sue these other states to void the election results as tainted. The Supreme Court wouldn't take it. Then 100 plus House members stood up and objected to the count that day when it was really just perfunctory, just counting the numbers. And he'd already been certified as the president elect, Joe Biden. And so let's just talk about that. Was it wrong to keep pushing it, to vote to overturn the election results, to try to disenfranchise people, to sort of help these people continue to believe, those who stormed, that the election had been stolen?
Well, first of all, the Texas lawsuit that many members signed an amicus brief for was asking the court to address one of the fundamental questions that's been at the heart of this, and that is the United States Constitution says that it's legislatures in each state that set the rules for electing a president. That did not happen in a number of states. They went around their legislative bodies, whether they went to a secretary of state, they got a court uh, ruling that would be favorable to them, but they didn't go through their legislatures. And at some point, are we going to address that problem? And that we asked the court to look at that, and the court did not do it. Asking the court to look at a question, uh, last time I checked, is not seditious either. But in the end, if you go back and look at the electoral college certifications being counted, that has been challenged, by the way, by Democrats for every president every Republican president this century. So literally every Republican who's been George W. Bush the second time, and Donald Trump, Democrats challenged that in Congress, just as it was done a week and 2 weeks ago. And again, you never heard the term sedition. In fact, in 2005, a majority of Democrats did not vote to certify the state of Ohio, and they were not successful. But that would have overturned the election. And nobody called them any kind of names. This isn't something new. It's a part of the process. The Constitution lays it out. If somebody doesn't like that process, they ought to change the law. And no one suggested it in the past when Democrats were using it.
I'll give you that latter point because it's definitely true that Democrats have stood up and objected to the certification results, though not in the numbers that we saw this past time. But the Supreme Court lawsuit was bogus. Come on.
The Supreme Court ultimately didn't take the case at all. But I'd like to see us look at election reform, not where we have a federal election standard, but where we at least say, shouldn't we know the results on election night? Shouldn't we have some kind of signature verification, some basic
Yes.
standards that, then let states go run their election, but with a standard where there's going to be some integrity throughout the process. You see abuses. Look, in our state, I was very active when I was a state legislature as later at cleaning up our problems. We had an election commissioner who went to jail. There were people who were going to jail for voter fraud all the time, and we cleaned it up. Some states still haven't cleaned that up. I wish they would,
Some
but
states don't have the
you know,
motivation, that's
and
one of the
and maybe
problems.
and maybe going forward, we take this as an opportunity to go back and look and say, is there a better way to do it? Look, Megan, in the state of New York, there's still a congressional seat that hasn't been certified yet. Claudia Tenney's been up since the very beginning, and yet they still won't call that election. That's ridiculous. 2 months later, we still don't have an answer, and that district isn't even being represented right now in Congress. That's the kind of stuff that we want to see fixed. Where if the law's on the books in New York, they need to follow the law in New York, and they're not.
What do you think though now? Because now, you know, if you look at the polls, 80%, I think, of Republicans still think this was a fraudulent election. And even though now we're being told no more talk of that, no more, because that talk is being blamed for what happened on Capitol Hill. I wonder what you think. Do you still think that there was voter fraud on a level that would have potentially changed the outcome of the race?
Look, where I had expressed my issues were with the states that, and there was a limited number, a small number that went around their law. Look at Pennsylvania. The law says that all votes are counted up until 8 o'clock on election night. That's when the polls close. And their court just said, well, we're just going to give extra days. We're going to waive some of the other laws and just kind of look the other way towards their laws. And there are many people in Pennsylvania, by the way, that are still upset about that their
Yes.
state's own laws weren't followed. And so, I know for so many people that just want to look the other way, that's a problem. There are people, millions of people that are upset with that. We've got to address that. We can't act like it doesn't exist. Joe Biden's going to be sworn in. I'll be at the inauguration. But you want to resolve the lingering questions. Let's address these fundamental issues going forward so that we can restore the integrity of our election system.
Okay, so but what do you make of, and the Pennsylvania one is really the best example in my view, having followed this. They have the best argument that the extension on the vote counting should have been done by the legislature and not a court. And that's what wound up happening. And, there's a reason we like the votes to be counted on election day as opposed to a week out. And, it can invite voter fraud. And that was sort of the basis of the argument. In any event, now it's passed, and we'll see whether they take a hard look at their system going forward when we don't have COVID, or if they're going to continue allowing all these mail in ballots. But I do wonder if, now you think this discussion can be had in any meaningful, intelligent way, right? Because it's like you say the words voter fraud now, and they look at you like you're talking like Al Qaeda, right? Like you've said something that's inherently dangerous, that could lead to violence. YouTube is banning videos suggesting any sort of widespread voter fraud. Those words have now become untouchable. So, is it still a conversation we can have?
Well, I think it's still a conversation that millions of people want to resolve. And again, you don't. resolve problems by ignoring them and calling other people names, and we're not even going to have this conversation. We need to fix problems where we see them, and then look, we're gonna get beyond this, but we're going to be a healthier nation if we resolve the issues that people have that are rooted in the law. Let's get back to the law. What's the purpose of having the constitutional requirement that legislatures set these rules if we're not going to follow the rules that they set? We're a nation of laws. Let's follow those rules, and if the rules have problems, let's go fix them.
What do you make of these calls to kick Senator Hawley and Senator Cruz out of the Senate, to disbar them as lawyers, to put them on the no-fly list, and some at Harvard want to take away their Harvard degrees?
Wow.
What do you
Are
think
they
of
going to
that?
give them the money? Are they going to give them the money back that they charged them to get those degrees? Look, I mean,
Hmm.
this cancel culture, Megan, has got to stop. It's been going on for years now, where more and more you see on the left. If people disagree with you, you just try to shut them down. You don't want to engage in conversation. It's been going on college campuses for over a decade now, where if you're conservative, they don't even let you speak. I thought college was supposed to be where you go to learn, to challenge your ideas against other people that have different ideas, and maybe you might change your mind. You might, sharpen your focus on things. But to just say, if we don't agree with you, again, are they trying to cancel all the Democrats who have, for years, every election this century, the Republicans been elected president, they've challenged it on the Democrat side? Are they going to cancel them as well? Again, be consistent. If you want to push some radical agenda, just know that be consistent on both sides. But that's
Yeah.
not where we need to go as a country. We are not a cancel culture nation. The First Amendment is something that we cherish, and it's one of the things that makes us the greatest nation in the history of the world. We've got flaws, we've got problems like anybody, but you don't see people leave other countries to go seek out the Moscow dream, or the French dream. They come to seek out the American dream, and it's still alive and well, but it's being tested. We've got to stand up to that this moment.
Well, what did you make of Twitter banning Trump?
you know, Twitter is getting into a place where their policy is very inconsistent on who they ban. When everybody points to the Ayatollah is still out there spewing anti-American and anti-Israel messages, and they're okay with that. The Chinese Communist Party is still able to disseminate false information on a regular basis. If they're going to have a policy, shouldn't it be consistent, or if it's just targeting conservatives? We've seen over and over where they're very quick to ban a conservative. They're not going to ban a liberal who's doing the same thing, and that consistency is starting to be pointed out a lot more.
You can right now on Amazon, which deplatformed Parler for having too much violent rhetoric, you can buy right now a T-shirt that reads "Kill all Republicans." That's of January 2021, and there are "Kill Trump" hashtags trending on Twitter and on Facebook and um, on some of the other platforms. Hashtag "Kill Trump."
Right.
Arrest Trump, not enough, kill Trump, and so on and so forth. That actually is a federal crime to threaten an assassination of a president. But the double standard is pretty obvious to anyone paying attention.
Yeah, the double standard, Megan, is very, very clear for everybody to see. And by the way, go back and look the last 4 years from the day that the president was sworn in. You had that resist movement. You even had the Speaker of the House saying that the election was hijacked. And go back and look at all of that hypercharged rhetoric for 4 straight years. Not to mention the Russian hoax and the impeachment hoax. I mean, just nonstop every day, going after this president for anything and everything, and trying to deny that he was even elected president. So again, the righteous indignation and the double standard is what people are looking at too, saying, go, kind of tone it down.
Now you're getting to it because I the bigger question I have, everybody wants to zero in on Trump's tweets or your objections, or like they want to blame specific Republicans. The bigger and I think much more important question is, how did the people get to the place where not only did they believe there was massive voter fraud, like the Kraken, the Dominion voting machine, whatever it is they believed, not just that, but that then they would resort to violence. They were committed to going in there and hurting lawmakers. How did they get to that place? And as somebody who sadly has had to deal with this in a very personal way in your own past, I mean, you were shot. Somebody tried to assassinate you for doing your job. How do you see that? Because I worry about whether we have the power to disabuse people of that resorting to violence, that ability to be a bit brainwashed, to just not see the world as clearly as the rest of us do when it comes to the limits we set on our own behavior.
Yeah, Megan, this is something that concerns me in general because the tone, the rhetoric is hypercharged right now. But to just first of all, nobody condones people who broke the law, and you could be angry. I know there's probably millions of people today that are disgusted by the storming of the Capitol, but that are also very angry with how the last 4 years has played out and the constant barrage of attacks against the president. When when there was not even anything to claim about him, they were still saying, deny he's president and just go after him every day. Go after his cabinet secretaries in restaurants and run them out of restaurants. That was going on, Megan, and
And
people watched it,
celebrated.
and it was and celebrated by the left. No one on the left was calling that out for years, and people just it built a powder keg. And we've got to now start focusing on diffusing it. Again, the left just wants to cancel everybody who's a Republican. That's ultimately where they're going with this. So, no matter what you did, you're to blame, but they're not to blame. When cities were being burned down and cops were being shot, some of them were saying, well, that's just what people do. No, that's not what people do. And it's got to be called out unequivocally on both sides. The left has to be consistent in this. They're not. That's got to change, and the rhetoric's got to tone down.
You were in 2018, you were targeted again. Again. Receiving threatening messages from somebody promising to go after your family and feed them lead. Cops raided the home of the guy threatening. They found 200 rounds of ammo, receipts for an assault rifle, handgun, books on bomb making, how to make a homemade silencer, and so. I mean, you. You've been down this road too many times, and you have been very good about speaking out about violence and the need to condemn it. And what we have seen. You wrote a very powerful piece a couple of years ago, long before any of this stuff, saying, look at what Eric Holder has said. Look what Maxine Waters is saying. Get in their face, confront them wherever they are. And Eric Holder saying, when they go low, we kick them. And Hillary Clinton with some of her rhetoric comparing Americans to terrorists. So I realize that does that excuse some of the rhetoric we've heard leading up to Wednesday's event by our leaders? No, nothing excuses, calls for violence. But they've been pretty explicit on the left, pretty explicit. And I just wonder if that mood and bigger than that, if the total dismantling of trust in our institutions was on full display that Wednesday on January 6th. If people, 4 years of them not trusting the media or not being able to discern what's true anymore, not trusting the people in charge to do what's right, irrespective of partisanship, not trusting anybody to do what's honest when it comes to President Trump. The people who defend him knee jerk. The people who attack him want to take him down, even if it requires lies, right? So it's like all these things went into creating a powder keg as I see it. But what do you think?
No, it's exactly right. I mean, to think that the anger that's been building up in our country just happened since the election is to ignore what's happened the last 4 years, and to see how it's been building, and who's been behind helping build it. Some people just want to point to the Republican side and say we can cancel them by blaming them for everything. They will have ignored what has been going on in this country for years, including how it really ignited over the summer. And again, there were some people who were protesting peacefully, and then there were some people who were out destroying cities and shooting and killing cops and innocent civilians, and that wasn't being called out by both sides. And now they want to, again, the righteous indignation. They want to go and try to assign blame today, but they were encouraging this for a long time too. And they've got to look in the mirror. We all need to look in the mirror But to say it's only one side doing it is to be completely dishonest.
What do you make of now? I mean, there are actual calls out there to shut down Fox News, Newsmax, OAN. And I thought of you because the man who shot you had posted violent rhetoric online prior to the attack. He hadn't been banned by Facebook. His favorite shows were Bill Maher and Rachel Maddow. He'd been on Facebook all the time saying it's time to destroy Trump and company. He was part of the resistance. He was part of several anti GOP Facebook groups, including, quote, terminate the Republican Party and, quote, the road to hell is paved with Republicans. And I just wonder if you're seeing, because, once again, if you look at the guy's social media profile, violent rhetoric, anger and hatred for the other side. He watched, far left programming. Rachel Maddow's about as far to the left as you can get. I don't remember Republicans saying Rachel Maddow should be banned or Bill Maher should be banned or that Facebook should be deplatformed, but you lived it. And by the way, Bernie Sanders too. He was a volunteer for Bernie Sanders. Some people were trying to suggest, Bernie Sanders had some role in it, but you didn't hold him accountable. You didn't think he was responsible for any of this, nor was he. But what are your thoughts on that and sort of what seems to be a double standard there?
No, and that clearly is a double standard. But early off, I said when I found out he was an active Bernie supporter, I said that Bernie's not the reason this happened. Yeah, this person went off the edge and he committed a violent act, tried to kill a lot of us, and he's been held accountable. And and again, you saw it coming together, but you didn't see an indignation and a repudiation of the entire left over that, as we shouldn't have. But today you are seeing that, and I think it's people trying to exploit a situation where they want to shift accountability, hold the people accountable who stormed the Capitol. They are being held accountable, by the way. I didn't see people saying, "Hey, when we're seeing buildings being burned down, let's go find the video of all the people that were burning down those buildings and arrest them." They should have been arrested over the summer for committing violent acts. Very few were. Today, I
Right.
think you're seeing across the board the people who were coming into the Capitol. There's a lot of video images. Many have been arrested. People in each community are identifying people they know that were there in those videos, and their family members are saying, "Hey, that was my brother in that video,"
I
and
know. I love it. It's a
that's a
lot of
good thing.
ex-wives,
It's a
which
good
I
thing.
really kind of love. It's a lot of the ex-wives going like, I know him. Good for
I
the
know
ex-wives
him.
of America.
You
All right,
know,
now wait,
and
because just a couple more questions. I know you're short on time. You wrote an op-ed saying the national temperature is way too high, that a powder keg has been smoldering in this country long before the events on the Capitol, and that, this violent rhetoric we've been seeing helps radicalize people. What what do we do about that? Right? Because it's America and we have free speech, and now we have platforms purporting to crack down on violent speech, but only on one side. So what's the answer?
well, the answer is for each of us to do our part to make things better. This is another tenet about the greatness of America is that people can actually make a positive difference. And if somebody thinks that they're if they're concerned about where they see our country right now, and people should be, because this is maybe one of the most divided times we've seen since whether it's the '60s or the Civil War. There's not many inflection points in our nation's history where we've been this divided, but then we've come out of those because people stepped up and said, we're going to work to make it better. And that's each of us. Any of us who don't like where this country is right now and where the temperature is can all play a role in bringing that temperature down. And that's what I've been encouraging. I work on that myself. We can always get better. But anyone who today says, hey, I'm going to make it better by shutting down somebody I disagree with politically, that's not the answer. It's never been the answer. We can all make it better. That's what our focus needs to be.
Some have said that's a reason why we shouldn't impeach the president. We shouldn't go forward with a Senate trial. I mean, now he's been impeached a second time, and I know you did not support the impeachment effort, but the response to that has been what President Trump did was so egregious. Even if you give him a pass on the events leading up to the riot at the Capitol, his dereliction of duty is the term used during the event, where he was reportedly watching it, reportedly enjoying it, reportedly had to be cajoled into sending out the few tweets he did, which, in the midst of saying, be peaceful, said, we love you, you're good people, and continued to complain about the steal, quote unquote. And not sending in the National Guard, sending out nasty tweets about Mike Pence as this thing was underway, and now we know Mike Pence was, hiding for his life inside the Capitol. Like all of that, I will say as a lawyer, that's where you get a lot stronger in the attacks on President Trump's conduct. So, A, do you think he committed an impeachable offense, even though you didn't vote for impeachment? And B, talk about what this trial, if they have it, is going to do to this need to lower the powder keg volume.
Well, Megan, the first thing that people should be wanting to do is to get all the facts out. I mean, it literally was days, less than a week after this happened, where they brought impeachment to the floor without even a hearing. That had never happened in the history of our country. It was just a rush to one more time go after the president without even being concerned about the facts. Facts are still coming out every day. We're finding out more things. That's where the focus should be. But also, again, to the point of, does this help or further divide our country? Clearly, it's further divided the country. And if they go forward in the Senate with some long trial, it's going to be he will already be gone from office. First of all, we need to be focusing on turning the corner, on bringing our country back together. But if the Senate wants to spend the first, however many weeks of Joe Biden's presidency on an impeachment trial, that takes away from the things that we all should be working on to help get our country back on track, to round the corner on this virus, to safely reopen schools and help people get back to work. I mean, there are a lot of big things that we need to be doing, and Donald Trump will not be in office when that
Yeah.
happens.
Well, and I
So,
should
again,
note
they can
that
just,
a lot of that, what I just said, is reporting from, in particular, the Washington Post, with one source
right,
unnamed, supposedly close to the
anonymous.
president. That's problematic, and that's why you do require a trial in the Senate where the president would get to defend himself and say, that's not true. Here's what I actually did. So we run with these media reports like they're gospel, and as we well know, they're not. Okay, last question. How are you? How are you? I mean, I saw you not long ago in the hallways of Fox, and you looked great, but I'm sure the audience would love to know how you're holding up and physically how you've done since the attack in 17.
No, I appreciate it, Megan. Look, God's been good to me. I've been blessed. I get better all the time. I do a lot of physical therapy still. I had to learn how to walk again. I had to, rebuild strength back in my legs. I still am working on that. That's where the bulk of the remaining nerve damage is. And so, work with folks that are helping me get better, and I put my energy into getting better. And I, say a lot of prayers and thank the Lord. And look, Capitol Police, Megan, again, we talked about the emotions of 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't be here without the heroism and bravery of Capitol Police. And yet again, you saw that on full display. Over 50 officers were beaten and injured, including Officer Signick, who died, another officer who committed suicide. These are heroes. Um, a few of the members of my detail were on the floor that day and actually helped secure the Capitol. Some of them are on the cover of Time magazine right now, and I think it reminds us all that live every moment to the fullest. Respect other people that disagree with us. Don't resort to violence, and just thank the Lord for the blessings we have.
You were playing a ball game. You were shot in the hip, suffered from critical wounds, underwent several surgeries, faced a lengthy recovery, and I'll never forget when you returned to Congress to that standing ovation. We didn't know if you would make it, and just the love you received there and the unity and the moments where you just remember we're rooting for one another. We're American. We love one another. We may have political disagreements, but we're rooting for one another. And I hope we can get back to that. Thanks for helping, and thanks for coming on and talking.
Well, we need to get back to that. It's great to be with you, Megan, and you take care. God bless.